At some point after 70, something shocking happens not outside of you, but inside you. It's the moment you realize you've been holding on so tightly for so long that you can't even tell what's love anymore, and what's just fear wearing love's face. The fear of being forgotten. The fear of losing control. The fear that if you stop carrying everyone, everything will collapse. And then comes the strangest, quietest twist. The day you finally loosen your grip, even just a little, your life doesn't fall apart. It gets lighter. Not in a fake, motivational way. In a real way that almost feels illegal, like you just discovered a hidden door in a house you've lived in for decades. A door that leads to a room filled with something you forgot existed, peace, without permission. But here's the mystery that changes everything. If peace is this close, why do so many people never reach it? What are they still holding without even realizing it until the very last chapter? Tonight, you're going to hear the 8 Buddhist truths that reveal exactly what to let go of after 70, and why the most peaceful chapter of your life might begin the second. You stop fighting what can't be controlled. Stay with me to the end, because the final truth is the one almost nobody expects, and it can change the way you see your entire life. If you want more stories like this, calm, powerful, and deeply human, please subscribe to Buddhism in Every Moment. Your support gives this channel the energy to keep creating videos that help you breathe, heal, and begin again. There is a kind of silence that only arrives when the world finally stops demanding a performance. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of a room after the last guest leaves, when the air is still warm, the lights are softer, and for the first time all day you can hear your own breath without competing with anyone else's expectations. After 70, many people think that silence is the beginning of the end. They mistake quiet for emptiness. They mistake fewer invitations for less worth. They mistake a slower body for a smaller life. But Buddhism whispers something completely different, something almost shocking in its tenderness and power. Quiet is not a punishment. Quiet can be a doorway into the most peaceful chapter of life. And here's the part that catches the throat, the part that makes people look away for a second, because it feels too true. The reason that chapter doesn't begin for everyone isn't because they lack time, or money, or strength. It's because they keep dragging the same invisible weight into every new day. They carry old roles like heavy coats in summer. They carry old arguments like stones in their pockets. They carry old fear of being unnecessary, fear of losing control, fear of changing, fear of being forgotten, like a suitcase they refuse to put down even when the handle is cutting into their palm. Buddhism doesn't tell you to pretend that fear isn't real. It doesn't insult the human heart by saying, just be positive. It says something more honest: to suffering is real, and it has a cause. And the cause is not age. The cause is clinging. Clinging to how life used to be. Clinging to how people should treat you. Clinging to how you think you must be seen in order to matter. Clinging to the idea that peace is something someone else hands you, as a reward, when you've finally been good enough. But peace isn't a reward. Peace is a release. If you've ever stood in Yosemite Valley, where stone rises like an ancient temple, and the sky feels wider than your worries, you know what it means to feel small in a way that doesn't humiliate you. It humbles you. It quiets the nervous system. It makes you realize how much of your daily stress comes from pretending you're in control of everything. The granite doesn't argue with time. The trees don't panic because they'll lose leaves. The river doesn't resist moving forward. Nature isn't trying to win. It's trying to be real. And that's why it feels like medicine. That's the kind of peace this chapter can hold. Not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the peace of perfect alignment with reality. The most radical thing Buddhism offers in this season of life is not a new belief. It's a new relationship with what has always been true. Everything changes. Everything. The body, the roles, the social circles, the reputation, the pace, the seasons, the definitions of success. Everything changes, not because life is cruel, but because life is alive. The mind suffers when it tries to freeze a moving river. There's a kind of pain that comes from fighting impermanence. It's like trying to keep the tide from coming in with your bare hands. It's exhausting, and it never works, and yet so many people spend decades doing exactly that, working harder, proving more, holding tighter, controlling more, blaming more, hoping that one day they'll finally reach a point where nothing can be taken from them. And then, after 70, the illusion gets harder to maintain. Not because the heart becomes weaker, but because the truth becomes louder. The truth that control was never as strong as it felt. The truth that the entire life has been moving on the breath of change. Buddhism calls this dukkha, the ache of life when we cling to what cannot be held. Dukkha isn't just suffering in the dramatic sense. It's the low-grade tension that lives in the chest when you're waiting for things to become different, before you allow yourself to be okay. It's the bitterness that shows up when you believe life owes you a certain ending. It's the tightness in the jaw when you replay what someone said 10 years ago and still feel the burn. It's the loneliness that grows when you think you need to stay strong, stay needed, stay impressive, even when your soul is begging you to rest. Here is the quiet miracle: once you see clinging clearly, you can stop feeding it. You can stop treating peace like something you'll earn in the future, and start practicing it like something you can choose in the present. Not by forcing yourself to feel calm, but by loosening your grip on what is strangling your spirit. That is why after 70 can be the freest chapter. Because the body may not run like it used to, but the mind can finally stop sprinting. Because the crowd gets quieter, and your own inner voice, your real voice, has a chance to speak. Because the world begins to release you from some of the roles you wore out of duty, and you can finally ask the question that most people avoid their whole life: what do I want to carry now? And what am I ready to lay down? And if you're watching this at 25, 35, 45, 55, don't miss what this chapter is really saying. This isn't just about the number 70. It's about what happens when the old ways of surviving stop working. It's about what happens when you succeed at things you thought would make you happy and still feel empty at night. It's about burnout, about ambition fatigue, about the way the modern world keeps the mind so loud that you can't hear your own life happening. The truth is, many people reach 70 already exhausted, not from living, but from resisting life, from holding their breath emotionally for decades, from postponing joy, from waiting for the perfect moment when everything is settled before they finally let themselves feel at peace. But life doesn't settle. It moves. And peace isn't the stillness of circumstances. It's the steadiness of the heart inside movement. Imagine the ocean air in Maui, how it doesn't rush you. Waves don't arrive with guilt or apology. They come, they go, they return. There's something deeply healing about standing near that rhythm, because it reminds you that your emotions can be like that too. They can rise and fall without becoming your identity. Your fear can be present without becoming your prison. Your grief can exist without making you bitter. Your joy can appear without you panicking that it will disappear. Impermanence isn't the enemy of happiness. It's what makes happiness possible. If nothing changed, nothing could be new. If nothing ended, nothing could begin. If everything stayed, love would not feel precious. The mind suffers because it forgets this and demands guarantees. Buddhism doesn't promise guarantees. It offers something better: freedom from needing them. That freedom begins with a willingness to look at the weight you've been carrying. Not in shame, not in judgment, in compassion, because everyone clings. Everyone does. The human nervous system was designed to protect itself by trying to control the unpredictable. The mind's job is to keep you alive, not to keep you peaceful. So it grasps. It predicts. It rehearses worst-case scenarios. It holds grudges because it thinks it's preventing future pain. It clings to identity because it fears being nothing. But you are not nothing without your roles. You are not empty without constant usefulness. You are not less without constant motion. This is where the doorway becomes visible. The moment you realize that clinging is not love. Clinging is fear. Love is spacious. Love allows breathing room. Love doesn't demand that life obey your timeline. Love doesn't punish you for changing. Love doesn't keep you trapped in old versions of yourself just because it feels familiar. Fear does. And fear, when it's been fed for decades, can wear the face of devotion. It can sound like responsibility. It can dress itself up as loyalty. It can whisper, if you let go, you'll be alone. It can insist, if you soften, you'll be taken advantage of. It can warn, if you stop controlling, everything will collapse. This is the moment Buddhism steps in like a steady hand on the shoulder and says, look again. Look more honestly. Look with a mind that doesn't flinch. Letting go does not mean you stop caring. Letting go means you stop suffering on purpose. It means you stop giving your life energy to things that can't be changed. It means you stop burning your days in arguments that never end. It means you stop rebuilding the same prison with new decorations. It means you stop carrying yesterday into today and then wondering why today feels so heavy. This chapter after 70 invites a new kind of courage. Not the courage of pushing harder. The courage of releasing. It takes courage to let go of being right. To let go of relationships that drain you. To let go of clutter and resentment. To let go of fear of aging. To let go of waiting for other people to give you permission to be happy. To let go of craving and comparison and regret. Because letting go doesn't just remove pain. It removes identity. If you've been the strong one, who are you when you rest? If you've been the fixer, who are you when you stop solving everything? If you've been the one who holds the family together, who are you when you stop carrying what isn't yours? If you've been defined by productivity, who are you when you move slower? If you've been defined by youth, who are you when your face and body tell a new story? These questions can feel terrifying until you realize the answer Buddhism has been offering all along. You are not your labels. You are awareness. You are the one who sees the story, and therefore you are not trapped inside it. This is why Buddhist practice is so gentle and so fierce at the same time. It does not ask you to build a new identity. It asks you to stop gripping the old one. It asks you to sit still long enough to feel what's true underneath the noise. In Central Park, there's a particular kind of ordinary magic. People moving through their day, dogs running, leaves turning, the city humming in the background. Even there, in the middle of everything, it's possible to feel a pocket of stillness. A small bench, a pause, a breath that belongs only to you. That's the lesson. Peace isn't a luxury reserved for people with perfect lives. Peace is a practice available even when life is imperfect. And the practice begins with one honest breath. Not a breath that tries to escape life, a breath that finally meets life. Inhale, and notice the tension you've been carrying like it's normal. Exhale, and allow one fraction of it to soften. Inhale, and admit what hurts without making it a tragedy. Exhale, and stop adding extra suffering by fighting what is already here. That's how a new chapter begins. Not with a dramatic transformation. With a small shift from gripping to opening. There is a beautiful, almost aching truth about reaching the later years, you start to see how short life is. Not in a depressing way, but in a clarifying way. You start to see that so many of the things you chased were never going to satisfy you the way you hoped. You start to see that the people you tried to impress never held your heart the way you needed. You start to see that the arguments you won didn't make you feel loved. You start to see that resentment didn't protect you. It imprisoned you. You start to see that you don't get extra years back as a refund for suffering bravely, and then you get to choose. You get to choose whether the rest of your days will be spent continuing to tighten your grip or whether they will be spent learning the art of release. This is not resignation. This is wisdom. Resignation says, nothing matters, so I'll go numb. Wisdom says, everything is passing, so I'll live awake. Resignation closes the heart. Wisdom opens it. Resignation makes you smaller. Wisdom makes you spacious. So, if the mind has been telling you that after 70 is a slow fade, let this be the counter message that lands like a bell in the chest. After 70 can be the first time you stop living in reaction and start living in truth. The first time you stop negotiating with the past. The first time you stop begging the future for guarantees. The first time you stop punishing yourself for being human. Because what if the most peaceful chapter isn't something that happens to you? What if it's something you begin by letting go? In the next parts, these 8 Buddhist truths will become practical, real, and painfully liberating. Not theory, not cliches. Real releases you can feel in your body. Real shifts you can notice in your relationships. Real peace you can practice on an ordinary Tuesday, even when nothing else is perfect. But for now, let the doorway be enough. Let the possibilities settle in your chest. You don't have to be younger to be free. You don't have to go back in time to begin again. You don't have to control everything to be okay. You only have to stop carrying what is breaking your spirit. And if you want to continue this journey, if you want more videos that turn Buddhist wisdom into something, you can actually live subscribe to Buddhism in every moment. Your support keeps this channel alive, and it helps these teachings reach the moments when they're needed most. There is a particular kind of tiredness that doesn't come from the body. It comes from the mind, specifically from the part of the mind that feels it must defend itself, prove itself, explain itself, and win. It's the fatigue of always having your inner fists up, even when nobody is attacking you. It's the exhaustion of turning every conversation into a courtroom, where your peace is always on trial, and your worth depends on the verdict. This is why the first letting go matters so much. Because if you can't loosen your grip on being right, you will struggle to loosen your grip on anything else. You can declutter your house, cut back your schedule, even change your habits, but if you still cling to the identity of the one who knows, your life will remain heavy. Not from circumstances, but from constant inner tension. Buddhism has a very simple, almost devastating insight about this suffering doesn't only come from clinging to people and things. It also comes from clinging to views, clinging to the story you tell yourself about how life is supposed to be, how people are supposed to behave, how you are supposed to be treated, and who you are supposed to be in order to be okay. The need to be right seems harmless at first. It often wears respectable clothing. It calls itself standards. It calls itself experience. It calls itself I've lived long enough to know. But if you look closely, quietly, honestly, you'll find it's often fear underneath. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of being corrected. Fear of being unseen. Fear of facing the possibility that you built your life on a belief that might not be entirely true. And that fear can harden over time until it becomes a personality. Many people think maturity means becoming more certain. Buddhism suggests something almost opposite. Maturity is becoming more spacious, not weaker, not passive, spacious, open enough to learn, open enough to admit, I don't know, open enough to update your mind without experiencing it as humiliation. Because here is the truth nobody says out loud: certainty can become a cage. It can shrink your world until it only contains what agrees with you. It can make you lonely while convincing you that you're simply surrounded by people who don't get it. It can turn wisdom into a weapon, and experience into a wall. And there's another quiet tragedy hidden inside the need to be right. It keeps you from being close. You can win the argument and lose the relationship. You can defend your point and destroy the tenderness. You can keep your pride intact and keep your heart starving. Buddhism doesn't ask you to become someone who never has opinions. It asks you to notice the difference between a view you hold gently and a view that holds you tightly. It asks you to see what happens inside when you feel challenged: the tightening in the chest, the heat behind the eyes, the urge to interrupt, the mental file cabinet swinging open, ready to pull out 10 reasons you're justified. That physical reaction is important because it reveals something deeper than the topic at hand. It reveals attachment. Not attachment to truth, but attachment to identity. If I'm not right, I'm not safe. If I'm not right, I'm not respected. If I'm not right, I am nothing. But Buddhism points you toward a freedom that doesn't depend on winning. It teaches that the self we protect so fiercely is not as solid as it feels. The I you defend in every disagreement is a moving story changing from decade to decade, shaped by memory, mood, and circumstance. When you cling to being right, you cling to a version of yourself that is already passing away. This is why letting go can feel terrifying at first. Because you're not just letting go of an argument. You're letting go of a whole strategy for existing. You're letting go of the belief that you must be unshakable in order to be worthy. But what if unshakable was never the goal? What if the real goal was to be awake? A mind that refuses to grow eventually becomes a museum. It displays old beliefs like antiques, polished, protected, admired, and rarely used for real living. Everything becomes a repetition. The same reactions, the same judgments, the same complaints, the same stories about how the world is going downhill and people aren't what they used to be. Even joy can fade in a museum because joy needs freshness. It needs curiosity. It needs the willingness to be surprised. This is why the story "I'm already done growing" is so dangerous. It doesn't just close your mind. It closes your heart. It makes you less reachable. It makes love more difficult because love requires listening, and listening requires the humility to accept that you might not have the full picture. It's not that you haven't learned anything. You've learned plenty. You've survived enough to earn a kind of authority over your own life. But Buddhism gently asks, is your experience becoming wisdom, or is it becoming armor? Armor is heavy. Armor makes noise. Armor keeps you alive in a war that might already be over. Wisdom is lighter. Wisdom doesn't need to prove itself. Wisdom is not threatened by new information. Wisdom can sit in a room and not be the loudest voice. Wisdom can let someone else speak without preparing a rebuttal. Wisdom can say, "Tell me more," and mean it. One of the most powerful shifts a person can make at any age is to stop treating every disagreement as a threat. To stop confusing correction with disrespect. To stop reacting as if being wrong is a kind of death. Because being wrong is not a death. It's an opening. In fact, one of the most peaceful sentences you can learn to say is, "I might be mistaken." Another is, "I didn't see it that way before." Another is, "I'm willing to learn." These sentences don't reduce you. They release you. They give you room to breathe again. There's a reason this matters after 70, and there's a reason it matters even if you're decades away from that number. Over time, life can slowly teach you to become rigid, not because you're bad, but because rigidity feels safe. It's easier to repeat what you know than to risk the embarrassment of learning something new. It's easier to stay inside familiar opinions than to face the discomfort of change. But Buddhism doesn't treat discomfort as a sign of failure. It treats discomfort as a sign you're awake enough to notice what is real. And reality is always moving. If your mind refuses to move with it, your mind will suffer. Not because you're punished, but because you're out of harmony with life. So what does it actually look like to let go of the need to be right? It starts smaller than you think. It doesn't start with some dramatic confession or public transformation. It starts in the moment when you feel the urge to correct someone, and you pause long enough to ask yourself, what do I want more right now, truth or superiority? Connection or victory? Peace or control? Sometimes truth is important. Sometimes harm needs to be addressed. Buddhism isn't asking you to become silent in the face of wrongdoing. It's asking you to check the energy you bring. Are you speaking from clarity or from irritation? From compassion or from ego? Are you trying to help or trying to win? Because the need to be right often has very little to do with truth. It has to do with pain. It has to do with old wounds that say, if I don't stay sharp, I'll be dismissed. It has to do with a history of not being heard. It has to do with the humiliation of being overlooked. When the heart carries that pain, the mind tries to protect it by becoming harsh, certain, and unyielding. But harshness is not protection. It's a second wound. The heart doesn't heal by becoming harder. The heart heals by becoming honest. This is where a practice can change everything. Not a big spiritual performance. A simple practice that gives you your life back one breath at a time. Try this the next time you feel challenged. Do not respond immediately. Take 90 seconds. Just 90. It will feel like a lifetime if your nervous system is used to defending itself. But stay with it. Feel your feet. Relax your jaw. Let your shoulders drop. Notice how quickly the mind forms weapons. Notice the stories it tells. They're disrespecting me. They don't understand. If I don't correct this, everything falls apart. See the stories without obeying them. Then ask yourself quietly, what is the kindest true thing I could do right now? Sometimes the kindest true thing is to speak gently, clearly. Sometimes it's to ask a question. Sometimes it's to listen. Sometimes it's to let it go entirely, because your peace is not worth trading for a 10-second victory. That 90-second pause is not weakness. It's mastery. It's the moment you stop being dragged by old reflexes and start living from choice. And if you want to build a life that stays fresh, if you want a mind that doesn't become a locked room, then adopt one small ritual that keeps the heart young. Learn 3 new things each week. Not because you're trying to become impressive, because you're trying to remain alive inside. 1 new fact, 1 new stretch, 1 new word, 1 new recipe, 1 new way to breathe, 1 new way to see. The content doesn't matter as much as the posture. The posture is humility. The posture is openness. The posture is a quiet vow. I will not let my mind fossilize while my body still breathes. This is how peace deepens. Not by controlling life more, but by resisting life less. Letting go of the need to be right doesn't make you smaller. It makes you freer. Because when you don't need to win every moment, you stop carrying the anxiety of constantly proving yourself. You stop tightening your life into a narrow shape. You stop exhausting the people you love with invisible pressure. You stop turning ordinary conversations into battlegrounds. And something unexpected happens when you soften. People soften around you. Not always, not instantly, not perfectly, but often. Because defensiveness is contagious, and so is calm. When you enter a room with a relaxed heart, you give as others permission to relax too. You become the kind of presence that feels safe, and safety is the soil where real connection grows. There is a deeper spiritual layer here too, one that Buddhism points toward with quiet precision. Clinging to being right is clinging to a self that must be protected. But what if the self doesn't need that kind of protection? What if the self is more like weather than like a fortress, changing, moving, responding, never fixed? If you can accept that, even a little, then disagreements don't have to threaten you. Feedback doesn't have to humiliate you. New ideas don't have to insult you. You can meet life as it is, instead of demanding it confirm your identity. And that is where the most peaceful chapter begins. Not after you win enough arguments, but after you stop needing to. There's a tenderness in realizing this. You don't have to live with your inner fists clenched. You don't have to spend the rest of your life defending a version of yourself that is already changing. You can put down the armor. You can let your mind breathe. You can become teachable again. Not because you're naive, but because you're wise enough to know that growth is not an age. Growth is a choice. So the next time you feel that familiar tightening, the urge to correct, to dominate, to prove, pause long enough to feel out what's underneath. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's the ache of not being seen. Don't judge it. Just see it, and then choose not the impulse but the freedom. Peace begins the moment you'd rather be real than be right. And when that becomes your habit, something almost holy happens. Life stops feeling like a debate you must win, and starts feeling like a moment you can finally live. There comes a moment in life when exhaustion no longer comes from what you are doing, but from who you are doing it with, and from what you keep allowing into your inner world. This kind of exhaustion is subtle. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as a heaviness in the chest after certain conversations, a dull irritation that lingers long after a phone call ends, a sense of being drained without knowing exactly why. Buddhism would say this is not random. It is the body's wisdom speaking before the mind is ready to listen. For much of life, we are taught that endurance is virtue. That loyalty means staying, even when staying costs us our peace. That kindness means tolerating emotional chaos. That love means absorbing harm without complaint. Over time, these beliefs harden into habits. We remain in conversations that corrode us. We keep emotional doors open to people who treat our energy like a resource they're entitled to consume. We excuse it as family, as history, as obligation, as this is just how it is. But there is a profound difference between compassion and self-erasure. Buddhism does not teach you to abandon others. It teaches you not to abandon yourself. Draining people are not always cruel or obvious. Often they are simply trapped in their own suffering, replaying the same anger, the same fear, the same stories of injustice. Every interaction becomes a recycling bin of old pain. Nothing new enters. Nothing heals. The nervous system learns to brace itself before the conversation even begins. You listen, but your body is already tired. You respond, but something in you quietly shuts down. This is where many people feel guilt. If I pull back, I'm being selfish. If I set boundaries, I'm being unkind. If I don't show up, I'm failing my role. But Buddhism offers a gentler and truer lens. You cannot pour clarity into a vessel that refuses to empty itself. You cannot heal someone by drowning with them. Compassion without wisdom becomes martyrdom. Wisdom without compassion becomes coldness. The path is the middle way, and the middle way includes boundaries. A boundary is not a wall. A boundary is a form of honesty. It is the moment you say, silently or aloud, "This costs me more than I can give." It is the recognition that your peace is not an unlimited resource. It is understanding that your nervous system is part of your spiritual life, not separate from it. When you ignore its signals, you pay with anxiety, resentment, and numbness. When you listen, you regain dignity. Buddhism speaks of right association, the understanding that who you spend time with shapes your mind. Not in a mystical way, but in a deeply practical one. Emotions are contagious. Tone is contagious. Agitation spreads faster than calm. If you are constantly surrounded by blame, bitterness, or fear, your inner world will begin to echo those frequencies, even if you think you're strong enough to resist. Strength is not measured by how much negativity you can endure. Strength is measured by how skillfully you protect what keeps you alive inside. There is a simple, honest question that cuts through confusion after interacting with someone. Do you feel more spacious or more contracted? More alive or more depleted? More grounded or more agitated? The body answers this question instantly, long before the mind constructs excuses. The body does not argue. It reports. Many people ignore these reports because they believe suffering is noble. But suffering is not noble when it is unnecessary. Buddhism does not glorify pain. It seeks to understand and reduce it. Letting go of draining people does not always mean dramatic exits or confrontations. Often, it begins quietly. Fewer explanations, shorter visits, more silence, a shift in how much you disclose, a refusal to engage in conversations that go nowhere. Choosing not to respond immediately. Choosing not to respond at all. These choices can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you have spent a lifetime being the listener, the fixer, the emotional anchor. There may be guilt. There may be fear of rejection. There may be a strange sense of emptiness where constant noise used to be. But stay with that emptiness. It is not loneliness. It is space. And space is where peace grows. There is a different kind of grief that often arises here, the grief of realizing how long you have been overgiving. How many times you silenced your own needs to keep the peace. How often you absorbed tension so others wouldn't have to feel it. This grief deserves compassion, not judgment. You did what you knew how to do at the time. You were surviving. Now, you are learning how to live. Wisdom does not ask you to harden your heart. It asks you to stop offering it to situations that repeatedly wound it. You can wish someone well without walking beside them. You can love without proximity. You can forgive without re-entry. These truths are not cruel. They are liberating. Buddhism often uses the image of holding a poisonous snake. If you grasp it carelessly, you are bitten. If you handle it with awareness, you are not harmed. Some relationships are like this. You do not need to destroy the snake. You simply need to stop squeezing it with bare hands. Equally important is letting go of draining conversations, not just people. Conversations that orbit endlessly around complaint, outrage, gossip, or victimhood can quietly poison the mind. They train the attention to look for what is wrong. They reinforce the illusion that peace is impossible. Over time, they shape identity. You are allowed to step away from these loops. You are allowed to say, "I don't want to talk about this right now." You are allowed to change the subject. You are allowed to listen less. You are allowed to choose silence. Silence is not avoidance when it is chosen consciously. Silence can be medicine. When you stop feeding these conversations, something remarkable happens. The mind begins to clear. There is less static, less mental rehearsal, less emotional residue at the end of the day. Sleep deepens. The body softens. The breath returns to its natural rhythm. Peace is not dramatic. It is subtle. And subtle things are easily drowned out by noise. Many people fear that if they step back, they will be alone. But loneliness and solitude are not the same. Loneliness is the pain of disconnection. Solitude is the pleasure of being undisturbed. Solitude allows you to hear your own thoughts without interruption. It allows your intuition to speak. It allows your values to surface. In places like Sedona, where the landscape feels stripped down to essentials, there is a quiet lesson written into the red stone. Not everything needs to be crowded to be meaningful. Space itself can be sacred. The guilt that keeps you in draining relationships often comes from confusing obligation with love. Love is voluntary. Love breathes. Obligation suffocates when it is disconnected from choice. Buddhism invites you to return choice to the center of your life, not in a selfish way, but in an honest one. Ask yourself, am I choosing this, or am I enduring it? Am I present, or am I bracing? Am I giving from fullness, or am I leaking energy because I'm afraid to stop? There is courage in choosing yourself without turning it into a war. There is dignity in protecting your peace without needing to justify it. There is maturity in recognizing that not everyone is meant to walk with you into this chapter. And when you begin to let go gently, consistently, you create room for something rare: relationships that feel nourishing instead of draining. Conversations that leave you calmer instead of tighter. Silence that feels like rest instead of absence. This is not about cutting people off in anger. It is about cutting off patterns that keep you trapped in depletion. It is about learning that your emotional energy is sacred because your life is sacred. When you stop scattering your attention among those who take without awareness, you reclaim it for what matters: clarity, kindness, presence, and peace. And this, too, is a form of compassion, not just toward yourself, but toward the world. Because a regulated, peaceful mind does less harm. It reacts less. It listens more deeply. It responds instead of exploding. It becomes a quiet refuge rather than another source of noise. The most peaceful chapter of life does not begin with adding more people, more conversations, more obligations. It begins with subtraction, with discernment, with the courage to say, "This no longer belongs in my inner world." When you honor that truth, you don't become smaller. You become lighter. And in that lightness, peace finally has room to stay. There is a moment that arrives quietly, often without ceremony, when you realize that your home is heavier than it needs to be. Not just with furniture or boxes, but with memories that never learned how to rest. With objects that whisper old identities. With emotions that were never given permission to leave. This weight is not accidental. It is the natural result of living a full life without being taught how to let go. Buddhism sees clutter differently than most people do. It doesn't judge it as laziness or disorganization. It sees clutter as unfinished relationships with objects, with memories, with pain. Every item kept just in case, every drawer you avoid opening, every box stored out of sight but never released, represents a decision postponed. And postponed decisions quietly drain life energy. The same is true for emotional clutter, unspoken resentments, old arguments replayed in the mind, words you wish you had said, apologies you never received, betrayals you thought you forgave but still carry in your body. These do not disappear with time. They harden, they settle, they become part of the atmosphere you live in. And atmosphere matters. You can feel it the moment you walk into a crowded room with no clear space to move. Your breath shortens, your shoulders tense, your steps become careful. Emotionally, clutter does the same thing. You begin to live cautiously inside yourself. You avoid certain memories. You step around certain feelings. You shrink your inner world to avoid touching pain. But the cost of avoidance is stagnation. Buddhism teaches that attachment is not just about wanting more. It is also about refusing to release what is already over. This is why the past can feel heavier than the future. The future is unknown, but the past is rehearsed. It has grooves worn deep by repetition. And when pain is rehearsed long enough, it becomes familiar, even comfortable in a strange way. This is how resentment survives. Resentment often masquerades as justice. It tells you that holding on keeps you safe, that remembering protects you, that staying angry prevents the same harm from happening again. But if you look closely, resentment does not protect. It poisons slowly, quietly, persistently. Buddhism offers a clear image. Holding on to anger is like gripping a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. The one who burns first is always the one holding it. You don't need to forgive to make the past acceptable. You forgive to make the present livable. Letting go of clutter, physical and emotional, is not about erasing history. It is about refusing to let history occupy your nervous system forever. It is about honoring what was without being imprisoned by it. This is why decluttering can feel emotional in ways that surprise people. You pick up an object and suddenly feel grief, or regret, or nostalgia so sharp it almost hurts. The object itself isn't the issue. It's the identity attached to it. The version of yourself who needed that item. The dream it represented. The chapter it belonged to. Buddhism does not ask you to become cold or detached. It asks you to see clearly. To recognize when an object is no longer serving life, but is instead anchoring you to a story that has ended. A home filled with too many things leaves no room for the present moment to land. A heart filled with unresolved pain leaves no room for peace to stay. And peace needs space. There is a quiet discipline in choosing simplicity. Not minimalism as a trend, but simplicity as a spiritual practice. It is the practice of asking, again and again, does this add clarity, or does it add weight? When you begin to ask that question honestly, your relationship with your surroundings changes. You stop keeping things out of fear. You stop saving items as proof that your past mattered. You stop surrounding yourself with reminders of who you were instead of honoring who you are becoming. The same question applies inwardly. Does this resentment add wisdom, or does it add suffering? Does this old grievance teach me anything new, or does it simply replay the same wound? Does carrying this anger help me live better today, or does it keep me tethered to a moment that can never be undone? Buddhism does not deny that harm happened. It does not minimize injustice. It simply asks, how long do you want to keep bleeding from a wound that has already closed? Forgiveness, in this sense, is not reconciliation. It is release. It is deciding that your peace matters more than being proven right about how much you were hurt. It is understanding that healing is not about fairness. It is about freedom. This kind of release does not happen all at once. It happens in small, deliberate gestures. In choosing not to revisit a memory one more time. In refusing to tell the same story again. In noticing when your mind begins to spiral and gently redirecting it back to the present moment. The breath becomes a tool here. Not as a technique, but as an anchor. When a memory arises, instead of following it, you return to the sensation of breathing. You remind yourself this moment is not that moment. This body is here now. This pain belongs to the past. Slowly, the mind learns a new habit. Physical decluttering supports this inner shift in a powerful way. When you open a drawer and let go of what no longer belongs, you are training the nervous system to trust release. You are proving to yourself that letting go does not lead to collapse. It leads to lightness. There is a reason so many people feel a strange relief after clearing even one small space. It is not about the space itself. It is about the message it sends to the mind, I am allowed to choose ease. This is especially important later in life, when the accumulation of decades can feel overwhelming. Every object has a story. Every story has emotion. Without conscious release, the weight becomes unbearable not physically, but emotionally. Buddhism does not ask you to empty your life. It asks you to empty what is no longer alive. There is a difference. What remains after release is not emptiness. It is clarity. It is the ability to move through your space and your inner world without bracing yourself. It is the freedom to sit quietly without being ambushed by memory. In places designed with intention, like a quiet gallery in Washington, D.C., where white walls and open floors allow art to breathe, you can feel how space itself invites stillness. Nothing competes. Nothing overwhelms. The mind relaxes because it doesn't have to filter noise. Your inner world deserves that same kindness. Letting go of clutter and resentment is an act of respect toward your remaining time. It is acknowledging that life is too precious to be spent guarding old pain. It is choosing to live forward instead of sideways. And perhaps the most tender truth of all is this: you do not dishonor your past by releasing it. You honor it by allowing it to rest. You lived. You loved. You suffered. You learned. That is enough. You do not need to keep proof of pain to validate your story. Your breath is proof that you survived. Your awareness is proof that you are still here. When you begin to clear space on shelves, in drawers, in the heart, you create a quiet invitation for peace to enter. Not the dramatic peace of constant happiness, but the deep peace of not being at war with your own life. This is how the most peaceful chapter takes shape, not by adding meaning, but by removing what blocks it. And when the weight finally lifts, even a little, you may be surprised by what you feel first. Not joy, not relief, but gratitude. Gratitude for the simplicity of breathing without heaviness. Gratitude for the quiet that no longer feels threatening. Gratitude for the space that allows life to meet you as you are, without obstacles. That gratitude is not an ending. It is a beginning. A beginning that only becomes possible when you decide that your heart no longer needs to be a storage room for pain. Fear of aging rarely announces itself directly. It doesn't always say, "I'm afraid of getting old." More often, it disguises itself as control, as urgency, as restlessness, as the need to stay useful, stay sharp, stay relevant, stay ahead of loss. It whispers, "Don't slow down." It warns, "If you loosen your grip, you'll disappear." And quietly, over the years, it trains the nervous system to live as if time itself were an enemy. Buddhism does not argue with the fact that aging brings change. It does not pretend that the body does not weaken, that memory does not soften, that energy does not fluctuate. What it challenges is the belief that these changes are a failure, that they are something to be feared, hidden, or resisted at all costs. Fear does not come from aging itself. Fear comes from resisting what is already happening. There is a particular panic that arises when control begins to slip, when the body no longer responds the way it used to. When the mind forgets a name, a word, a detail. When independence feels less guaranteed. This panic is not just about capability, it is about identity. If you have spent a lifetime being competent, being needed, being the one who holds everything together, then aging can feel like a threat to who you think you are. Buddhism meets this fear with radical honesty. It says, everything you have ever been able to control was temporary. The illusion was not that control existed. The illusion was that it could be held forever. Control is seductive because it promises safety. But safety built on control is fragile. The tighter you grip, the more exhausted you become. The more anxious you grow. The more terrified you feel at the thought of change. This is why fear of aging often intensifies the more you try to fight it. Resistance amplifies fear. Acceptance dissolves it. Acceptance, in Buddhism, is not resignation. It is not giving up. It is the courage to see clearly without flinching. It is the willingness to say, "This is happening," without immediately adding, "And this is terrible." There is a profound relief in that shift. When you stop arguing with reality, your energy returns to you. The body has its own wisdom. Every wrinkle, every ache, every slowing down is not just loss, it is information. It is the body asking for a different kind of relationship. Less domination, more listening, less demand, more care. Fear of aging often comes from treating the body like a machine that has betrayed you instead of a companion that has carried you faithfully through decades of living. The body is not failing you. It is changing because life changes. Buddhism invites gratitude here, not as a forced positive attitude, but as a grounding truth. This body has survived everything that has happened to you. It has adapted. It has healed. It has endured heartbreak, stress, joy, grief, love. Every sign of aging is evidence of survival. When fear tightens around the future, it is helpful to return to the present body. To feel the weight of your feet on the floor, the rhythm of breath, the sensation of being alive right now. Fear lives in imagined futures. Peace lives in lived moments. There is also fear around dependence, around needing help, around not being self-sufficient. Many people equate independence with dignity. Buddhism gently reframes this. Interdependence is not weakness. It is reality. No one has ever lived alone. From birth to death, life is sustained by countless unseen supports. The belief that you must never need help is not strength. It is isolation. Letting go of fear of aging means letting go of the fantasy of total independence. It means allowing yourself to be part of the human rhythm of giving and receiving. Sometimes you support. Sometimes you are supported. Both are expressions of belonging. This fear is often accompanied by a deeper one, the fear of death. Buddhism does not treat death as a taboo. It treats it as a teacher. Not to make life morbid, but to make it honest. Awareness of mortality is meant to sharpen presence, not darken it. When you remember that time is finite, you become more selective about how you spend your energy. You stop wasting it on constant worry. You stop postponing peace. You stop living as if you have unlimited chances to begin again. Paradoxically, accepting death softens fear of aging. Aging becomes part of a natural arc, not a personal failure. Each phase has its dignity. Each phase has its own form of beauty. There is a quiet elegance in this stage of life, a clarity that comes from having seen enough to know what doesn't matter. The drama loses its grip. The noise loses its appeal. What remains is essence. Fear tries to convince you that you are losing something essential. Buddhism shows you that you are shedding what is unnecessary. When control loosens, care can deepen. You may not be able to move as fast, but you can move with more awareness. You may not have the same energy, but you can direct it more wisely. You may not command attention the way you once did, but you can offer presence, and presence is rarer and more valuable than attention. In places like the Grand Canyon, where layers of time are visible in stone, there is a humbling reminder: erosion is not destruction. It is revelation. As the surface wears away, deeper patterns emerge. Aging does the same. It reveals character. It reveals values. It reveals what remains when excess falls away. Letting go of fear of aging means trusting that something meaningful is still unfolding, even if it looks different than before. It means allowing your definition of success to change. It means measuring life, not by productivity or appearance, but by peace, clarity, and integrity. This shift does not happen overnight. Fear has momentum. It has been rehearsed for years. But it can be met gently, one moment at a time. When fear arises, instead of arguing with it, acknowledge it. I see you. Then ask what it needs. Often, fear wants reassurance. It wants presence. It wants rest. It wants permission to stop performing. You can give it that. The body responds when it is treated with kindness instead of pressure. The mind settles when it is allowed to release the impossible task of stopping time. Letting go of fear of aging is not about pretending you are young. It is about fully inhabiting the age you are. It is about showing up honestly, without apology, without denial. This is how panic gives way to peace. Not by controlling what cannot be controlled, but by aligning with what is true. When you stop fearing aging, you stop fearing life. You stop bracing against the future. You start meeting it with curiosity instead of dread. And in that meeting, something beautiful happens. Time no longer feels like it is chasing you. It feels like it is walking with you. This is not the loss of control. It is the return of trust. Trust in life. Trust in the body. Trust in the unfolding that has carried you this far and will carry you the rest of the way, one honest breath at a time. There is a quiet disappointment that settles in when you realize how often happiness has been postponed. Not because life was empty, but because you were waiting. Waiting for someone to notice. Waiting for someone to change. Waiting for approval, gratitude, recognition, an apology, a call that never came. Waiting for another person to finally deliver the permission to feel at peace. This waiting can last decades. Buddhism names this suffering with clear eyes. It is the pain of outsourcing joy. It is the habit of handing your inner life to conditions you cannot control and then wondering why peace feels so fragile. When happiness depends on someone else's behavior, attention, or understanding, it becomes unstable by design. The heart was never meant to live on borrowed ground. Many people don't realize how deeply this pattern runs. It hides beneath devotion, beneath loyalty, beneath love itself. It sounds reasonable. I'll be happy when they appreciate me. I'll relax when they stop disappointing me. I'll feel whole when they finally see who I am. These thoughts feel human. They feel earned. And yet, they quietly bind the heart to a future that may never arrive. This is not because others are cruel. It is because human beings are unreliable sources of permanent fulfillment. Buddhism does not teach withdrawal from relationship. It teaches freedom within relationship. It asks you to notice the difference between sharing happiness and depending on it. Between loving someone and using them as an emotional anchor. When you depend on others for happiness, your inner world becomes reactive. A text message can lift you. Silence can crush you. A compliment can steady you. A careless word can unravel you. Your peace begins to rise and fall with external weather, and you live in a constant state of subtle vigilance, scanning for signs that you are okay. This vigilance is exhausting. It trains the nervous system to stay alert, to monitor tone, timing, expression. It turns relationships into negotiations rather than encounters. You begin to perform instead of be. And slowly, without meaning to, you drift away from yourself. Buddhism calls this attachment not because attachment is immoral, but because it is costly. Attachment ties happiness to outcomes. It teaches the mind that joy must be earned through conditions rather than cultivated from presence. The cost is not only disappointment. The cost is intimacy. When you expect others to make you happy, you place a burden on them that no one can carry indefinitely. Love begins to feel like obligation. Affection begins to feel like pressure. Even well-meaning people can feel drained by expectations they never agreed to hold. And when expectations go unmet, as they inevitably do, resentment grows. You tell yourself a story about how much you've given and how little you've received. The heart hardens. The distance widens. But here is the quiet truth: Buddhism offers happiness that depends on another person is not happiness. It is hunger. Real happiness is not loud. It does not beg. It does not bargain. It arises from a relationship with the present moment that is steady enough to hold joy without gripping it and loss without collapsing. This does not mean becoming self-sufficient in a cold or isolated way. It means becoming emotionally rooted. It means knowing how to return to yourself when the world is uncertain. It means learning how to generate warmth from within so that love becomes an exchange, not a transaction. There is a profound dignity in this shift. When you stop waiting for others to make you happy, you reclaim your agency. You stop pacing your life by someone else's readiness. You stop shrinking your needs to avoid disappointment. You stop performing gratitude for crumbs. You stop begging silently for reassurance. Instead, you begin to ask a different question: what is already here that I can receive? Often, the answer is simple and overlooked. Breath, light, stillness, a moment without demand, a cup of warmth in your hands. The sensation of being alive without explanation. These are not substitutes for love. They are foundations for it. Buddhism emphasizes that joy is a practice, not in the sense of forcing positivity, but in the sense of training attention. Attention shapes experience. What you learn to notice becomes your life. When attention is trained to scan for what others are failing to give you, dissatisfaction becomes your baseline. When attention is trained to receive what is already present, gratitude becomes natural. This does not erase longing. It transforms it. Longing becomes appreciation instead of ache. Desire becomes curiosity instead of demand. Connection becomes mutual instead of one-sided. There is also grief here, a real and honest grief. The grief of realizing how long you waited. How many moments passed while you were hoping someone else would unlock your happiness. This grief deserves tenderness, not blame. You were taught this pattern. You absorbed it from a culture that equates worth with validation and love with attention. Buddhism does not shame you for this. It simply offers another way. That way begins with learning how to be present with yourself without distraction. Not as a self-improvement project, but as a reunion. Sitting quietly. Feeling what is there. Letting the nervous system settle without reaching outward. Allowing yourself to be enough company for your own mind. This can feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable. When you are used to external stimulation and reassurance, stillness can feel like absence. But stay. There is a difference between emptiness and space. Space allows something new to enter. In that space, you may discover a gentler rhythm. You begin to notice small joys without needing to justify them. You stop waiting for permission to feel content. You start offering yourself the kindness you once hoped others would provide. And something subtle changes in your relationships. When you no longer need others to complete you, you meet them more honestly. You listen without desperation. You give without depletion. You receive without anxiety. Love becomes lighter. In places like the quiet shoreline of San Diego, where waves arrive without urgency and leave without apology, there is a living lesson. The ocean does not demand that you admire it. It simply moves. Its presence is enough. And standing near it, you remember something important. Peace does not chase. Peace abides. Letting go of waiting for others to make you happy does not mean closing your heart. It means opening it without strings. It means allowing happiness to arise as a state of being rather than a reward. This is one of the most liberating realizations in Buddhist practice. You do not need life to rearrange itself before you can feel at ease. You do not need people to become different before you can rest. You do not need to be chosen to be whole. You are allowed to be happy quietly, gently, without announcement. And when happiness is no longer a demand you place on others, it becomes a gift you can share. Not because you need to, but because you want to. This is how waiting dissolves into living. This is how the heart stops postponing itself. This is how peace begins to feel like something you carry within you, steady and available, no matter who shows up or doesn't. There is a restless ache that lives beneath much of modern stress, an ache so familiar that many people mistake it for normal. It is the quiet insistence that something is missing, that something more is needed, that peace is just one step away if you can only get the next thing right. More approval, more certainty, more control, more reassurance, more success, more youth, more meaning. Buddhism calls this craving, not desire in its healthy, human form, but craving as compulsion, the inner grasping that refuses to let life be as it is. Craving does not shout. It whispers. It whispers that happiness is conditional. It whispers that if you can just hold on a little tighter, you'll finally feel secure. It whispers that letting go is dangerous, that without attachment you will lose what matters most. And so the mind tightens. The heart braces. The body lives on edge. Clinging feels like safety, but it is the root of stress. This is one of the most difficult truths to face, because clinging often masquerades as love, ambition, responsibility, even spirituality. You cling to relationships because you care. You cling to identity because you worked hard for it. You cling to routines because they once saved you. You cling to outcomes because uncertainty scares you. None of this makes you weak. It makes you human. But Buddhism invites you to look more closely at the cost. Clinging turns enjoyment into anxiety. When you cling to joy, you fear losing it. When you cling to people, you fear abandonment. When you cling to roles, you fear irrelevance. When you cling to being needed, you fear rest. The mind becomes a constant rehearsal of what could go wrong. Even good moments feel fragile, like glass you are afraid to touch. This is why stress often increases, not decreases, as life becomes more comfortable. The more you have, the more you fear losing. The more identity you accumulate, the more you must defend. The nervous system never truly rests because it is always guarding something. Buddhism does not ask you to stop caring. It asks you to stop chaining your peace to outcomes you cannot control. There is a profound difference between love and attachment. Love is spacious. It allows change. It does not demand permanence. Attachment is tight. It fears change. It insists on guarantees. Love says, I am grateful for this moment. Attachment says, I need this moment to stay. The first is nourishing. The second is exhausting. Clinging is especially dangerous because it hides inside habits that feel normal. Checking your phone repeatedly for reassurance. Replaying conversations in your head, searching for certainty. Measuring your worth through productivity or attention. Holding on to identities that no longer fit because you don't know who you'd be without them. These habits create a low-grade tension that lives in the body. Shoulders tight, jaw clenched, breath shallow, sleep restless. The mind may call this busyness or responsibility, but the body knows it as stress. Buddhism approaches this with compassion rather than force. It does not tell you to stop clinging by sheer willpower. It asks you to see clinging clearly, to notice how it feels in the body, to recognize its texture, to observe what happens when you don't obey it immediately. This is where freedom begins, not in suppression, but in awareness. When a craving arises, instead of feeding it or fighting it, you pause. You feel it. The pull, the urgency, the story it tells. You notice how quickly the mind promises relief if you just act. Then you wait. You breathe. You let the wave crest and fall. This is not denial. It is intimacy with your inner world. Most cravings are not needs. They are signals of discomfort, loneliness, boredom, fear, fatigue. When you respond to every signal with immediate gratification or control, you never learn what the signal is actually asking for. Often it is asking for rest, or presence, or honesty, or kindness. Clinging keeps you busy. Letting go makes you available. One of the great misunderstandings about Buddhism is the belief that non-attachment means indifference. This could not be further from the truth. Non-attachment is what allows you to care deeply without burning yourself alive. It is what allows joy without panic, love without suffocation, purpose without obsession. To let go of clinging is to trust that life can be met moment by moment without rehearsing every outcome in advance. It is to accept that uncertainty is not a flaw in existence. It is its nature. This acceptance does not happen all at once. It happens in moments. Small, almost invisible moments where you choose not to tighten, where you notice the urge to control and gently soften instead, where you allow things to unfold without interference. These moments accumulate. They retrain the nervous system. They teach the body that it is safe to relax, even when everything is not resolved. There is a particular relief that comes when you stop demanding that life be predictable before you allow yourself to be calm. You begin to experience equanimity, a steady presence that can hold pleasure and pain without being thrown off balance. Equanimity is not numbness. It is resilience. It is the ability to enjoy what is present without clinging, and to endure what is difficult without despair. It is the understanding that everything passes, and because everything passes, nothing needs to be gripped with panic. This understanding changes how you move through the world. You still set intentions, but you release fixation. You still love, but you release possession. You still work, but you release self-worth from outcome. Stress begins to lose its grip because stress feeds on attachment. When attachment loosens, stress starves. In quieter places, like a slow morning in Santa Fe, where simplicity seems to breathe through the streets, there is a reminder that life does not need to be crowded to be meaningful. There is dignity in enoughness. There is peace in not chasing. Letting go of clinging does not make life smaller. It makes it truer. You begin to notice moments you used to rush past. The way light falls across a room. The calm that follows honest effort. The satisfaction of presence without achievement. You stop measuring life by how tightly you hold it and start experiencing it by how fully you meet it. There is also grief in this process. The grief of realizing how much energy you spent gripping what could never be secured. How much tension you carried unnecessarily. How many moments were overshadowed by fear of loss. This grief is not a failure. It is a sign of awakening. As clinging loosens, something steadier takes its place: trust. Not blind trust that everything will go your way, but grounded trust that you can meet whatever comes with clarity and compassion. You stop living as if peace is fragile. You discover it is resilient. This is the gift of letting go of craving and clinging. Stress does not disappear, but it no longer rules you. Desire does not vanish, but it no longer owns you. Life continues to change, but you stop fighting its movement. You learn to enjoy without gripping, to love without chains, to live without constant negotiation with fear. And in that freedom, the heart finally exhales. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer at war with impermanence. This is what it means to loosen the invisible chains, and to discover that peace was never on the other side of control, but on the other side of letting go. There is a particular sadness that arises not from loss itself, but from comparison. It is the quiet ache that appears when you measure your life against someone else's timeline and find yourself falling short. Not because you truly are, but because comparison has a way of distorting reality until only deficiency remains. This sadness often intensifies with age, especially in a world that worships youth. A world that equates value with speed, beauty with smoothness, relevance with novelty. Without realizing it, many people begin to look at younger lives not with curiosity or appreciation, but with a silent question lodged in the chest. Did I miss my chance? Buddhism recognizes comparison as one of the most subtle thieves of joy. Not because noticing differences is wrong, but because comparison turns difference into judgment. It takes what is unique and reshapes it into a hierarchy. Someone is ahead, someone is behind, someone is winning, someone is fading, and in that mental ranking, peace disappears. Comparison feeds on imagination. It creates stories about how others are happier, freer, more fulfilled. It edits out their struggles and magnifies your regrets. It convinces you that life is a race you are losing, even though there was never a finish line to begin with. The comparison with youth is particularly painful because it targets something that cannot be reclaimed. Time moves in one direction. The body changes. The seasons turn. When the mind resists this truth, it turns nostalgia into suffering and admiration into envy. But Buddhism offers a radically different way of seeing time. It does not divide life into better and worse phases. It sees life as unfolding, each stage revealing different forms of beauty, strength, and wisdom. Youth carries energy and possibility. Age carries depth and clarity. One is not superior to the other. They are not competing chapters. They are movements in the same song. The problem is not that youth is valued. The problem is that age is devalued, especially by those who are living it. When you compare yourself to who you used to be, or to those who are younger, you are often comparing energy to insight, speed to discernment, novelty to understanding. It is not a fair comparison. It is not even an honest one. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises when the mind insists on being somewhere other than where it is. Comparison is a refusal of presence. It says, this moment is not enough because it does not match another moment. But this moment is all you have ever lived in. Comparison also fractures gratitude. Instead of appreciating what remains, the mind obsesses over what has changed. Instead of honoring what you have gained, it mourns what you no longer possess. Over time, this creates a quiet bitterness not always visible to others, but deeply felt inside. This bitterness is not because life failed you. It is because you are asking life to repeat itself. Letting go of comparison requires courage because it means letting go of a familiar story, the story that your best days are behind you. This story feels convincing because it is repeated so often in advertising, in media, in casual conversation. But repetition does not make a story true. It only makes it loud. The truth is more complex and more hopeful. Some joys belong to youth. And some joys can only be accessed later, after disappointment has refined you, after illusion has fallen away, after urgency has softened into discernment. There is a quiet joy that comes from knowing what matters, from no longer chasing what never satisfied you, from being less impressed by appearances and more attuned to substance. Buddhism calls this wisdom, not intellectual knowledge, but lived understanding, the kind that cannot be rushed, the kind that only arrives through time. When you let go of comparison, you stop turning life into a competition and start treating it as an experience. You stop asking, am I doing better or worse? And begin asking, am I living honestly? That shift alone can bring immense relief. There is also a generous joy that Buddhism encourages, the joy of appreciating the happiness of others without turning it into self-criticism. This is not denial of pain. It is training the heart to expand instead of contract. When you see someone younger succeeding, instead of asking what you lost, you can ask what you learned. When you see energy you no longer have, you can acknowledge it without resentment. When you see beginnings, you can remember endings that taught you something essential. This practice does not diminish you. It matures you. There is a beautiful metaphor, often used in Buddhist teaching. A flower bud does not envy the open bloom, and the bloom does not envy the leaf that will follow. Each stage serves the whole. Each has its role. Each contributes to the life of the plant. Your life is not a failed version of someone else's. It is a complete expression of its own conditions. Comparison also hides another truth. Many of the things you envy in youth, certainty, confidence, freedom, were often illusions. Youth is not free from fear. It is simply less aware of it. Age is not burdened by wisdom. It is shaped by it. What you have now is perspective. And perspective is a gift, even if it is quieter than ambition. Letting go of comparison also allows you to contribute in new ways. When you stop competing with younger generations, you can support them. You can mentor without needing recognition. You can offer clarity without needing authority. You can become a steady presence rather than a striving one. In places like New Orleans, where jazz musicians understand that depth comes from years of practice, there is a lesson written into the music. The sound is richer because it has lived, because it has weathered mistakes, pauses, improvisation. Youth brings volume. Experience brings soul. Your life has soul. And soul does not diminish with age. It deepens. When you release the belief that your worth depends on comparison, you reclaim a quiet dignity. You stop apologizing for who you are now. You stop hiding the marks of time as if they were shameful. You begin to wear your life honestly. This does not mean ignoring grief. There are real losses, real endings, real changes. Buddhism does not deny this. It simply refuses to turn loss into identity. You are not less because time has passed. You are different. And different does not mean diminished. The most peaceful chapter of life opens when you stop measuring yourself against a past that cannot return and start inhabiting the present that is asking for your presence. When you stop looking sideways at other lives and start looking inward with kindness. Comparison will always offer you an escape from the present. Letting go offers you a home within it, and when you finally rest there, something surprising happens. You realize that your best days were never located in a particular age. They were always located in awareness. Right here, right now. There is a quiet weight that many people carry without speaking its name. It settles into the chest late at night, when distractions fade and the mind begins to wander backward. It is the weight of regret. The thoughts that begin with "if only." The scenes replayed with different endings. The moments you wish you could step back into, armed with what you know now. Regret is not loud. It does not demand attention. It waits patiently, then whispers when you are tired. And over time, if left unquestioned, it becomes a story about who you are and what your life means. Buddhism does not treat regret as an enemy. It treats it as a signal that you cared, that you wanted something real, that you were paying attention, even if you didn't know how to act with clarity at the time. The suffering does not come from regret itself. The suffering comes from believing that regret is proof that your life is over, that it is too late to begin again, that the past has sealed your fate. This belief is one of the most painful illusions the mind creates. Regret convinces you that time is a closed door, that because a moment has passed, all possibility has passed with it. It tells you that growth belongs only to the young, that change requires a blank slate, that healing demands a perfect history. Buddhism gently dismantles this illusion by pointing to a simple truth. The past cannot be changed, but the relationship to it can. This distinction is everything. When regret is held without awareness, it becomes a punishment. You replay mistakes as evidence of unworthiness. You treat memory like a courtroom where the verdict is always guilty. You measure who you are now against who you think you should have been, and you never come out ahead. But when regret is met with mindfulness, it becomes wisdom. Wisdom does not erase the past. It learns from it without becoming trapped inside it. It understands that every decision was made with the awareness available at the time. That fear, ignorance, pressure, and longing all shape behavior. That hindsight clarity is not a fair weapon to turn against your former self. There is a quiet cruelty in judging the past with the knowledge of the present. Buddhism invites compassion here, not indulgence. Compassion. The same compassion you would offer someone else who was doing their best in confusing circumstances. The same understanding you would extend to a friend who made a mistake and suffered for it. You are not exempt from that kindness. Regret often lingers because it is confused with responsibility. The mind believes that letting go of regret means excusing harm or denying accountability. But letting go is not forgetting. It is not denying. It is choosing not to continue inflicting pain on yourself for lessons already learned. Responsibility looks forward. Punishment looks backward. Buddhism asks you to notice how often regret is used as a form of control. As if replaying the past enough times might somehow fix it. As if suffering now could retroactively make things right. This is a heavy burden to carry, and it serves no one. There is another layer to regret that is rarely acknowledged: grief. Grief for the life you imagined. Grief for the person you might have been. Grief for opportunities missed, words unsaid, paths not taken. This grief deserves space. It deserves to be felt, not analyzed. When grief is denied, it hardens into regret. When grief is allowed, it softens into acceptance. Acceptance does not mean liking what happened. It means recognizing that it happened and choosing to live forward anyway. One of the most damaging beliefs regret creates is the idea that it is too late. Too late to apologize. Too late to forgive. Too late to change. Too late to begin something meaningful. Too late to become more honest, more peaceful, more alive. This belief collapses time into a single moment and declares it final. But life does not operate that way. As long as you are breathing, you are in relationship with the present. And the present is where all change happens. Not in memory. Not in fantasy. Here, Buddhism teaches that every moment is a new arising, not because the past disappears, but because the mind has the capacity to respond differently now. That capacity does not diminish with age. If anything, it grows clearer when illusions fall away. Regret says, I should have known. Wisdom says, I know now. That difference matters. Knowing now means you can choose differently now, speak differently now, live differently now, offer kindness now, set boundaries now, rest now, begin now. The mind resists this because it prefers drama to simplicity. It prefers the familiar pain of regret to the uncertainty of change. Change asks something of you. Regret only asks you to suffer. Letting go of regret requires courage because it means releasing the identity built around it. If you have carried regret for a long time, it may feel like part of who you are. Releasing it can feel like losing a piece of yourself. But what you are losing is not truth. You are losing a story that no longer serves you. Buddhism often uses the image of carrying a heavy stone. You may have picked it up long ago for a reason. Perhaps it helped you survive. Perhaps it reminded you to be careful. But there comes a time when carrying it no longer makes sense. The path ahead requires free hands. Putting the stone down does not erase where you have been. It simply allows you to walk more freely from here. There is a quiet dignity in beginning again without spectacle. No announcements. No dramatic reinvention. Just a subtle shift in how you treat yourself. How you speak to yourself. How you allow the past to rest. Beginning again might look like making amends where possible. Or forgiving silently where it is not. It might look like choosing one small habit that honors who you are becoming. Or allowing yourself joy without feeling you have to earn it. These are not small things. They are acts of deep courage. In places like Acadia National Park, where sunrise touches the coastline with soft light, there is a reminder that beginnings do not need permission. The sun does not apologize for rising late in the season. It rises because that is what life does. You are allowed the same grace. Your life is not a sum of mistakes. It is a collection of moments, each one offering its own instruction. Regret becomes unbearable only when it is mistaken for a life sentence rather than a lesson. When you let go of the belief that it is too late, something opens. Not excitement, not certainty, but possibility. Quiet, steady possibility. And possibility is enough. You may not be able to rewrite your past, but you can write the tone of your present. You can decide whether the remaining pages are filled with self-punishment or self-respect, with bitterness or with honesty, with fear or with curiosity. Buddhism does not promise a clean slate. It offers a clean relationship with what is. And in that relationship, regret loosens its grip. The past becomes a teacher instead of a jailer. The future becomes a direction instead of a threat. It is not too late to live with clarity. It is not too late to soften. It is not too late to choose peace. The only moment that is ever too late is the one you refuse to enter. And this one right now is still open. There is a moment quiet, almost ordinary, when everything you've been holding finally begins to make sense. Not because life has been solved, but because you no longer feel the need to solve it. This is the moment the most peaceful chapter truly begins. Not with fireworks, not with certainty, but with a deep exhale you didn't realize you'd been holding for decades. You've walked through 8 truths, 8 releases, 8 doors that quietly ask the same question in different ways. What are you still carrying that no longer belongs to you? Not as a test, as an invitation. The most profound shift does not come from understanding these truths intellectually. It comes from living them gently, imperfectly, day by day. Buddhism has never been about dramatic transformation. It has always been about small, honest steps taken with awareness. This final chapter is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming less burdened. And this is where a simple path matters. Not a rigid program, not another standard to live up to, but a rhythm one that honors where you are and respects the limits of being human. Imagine the next 30 days not as a challenge, but as a soft landing. In the first week, you practice openness. You notice how often the mind tightens around being right, being certain, being in control. You don't try to fix it. You simply notice. When the urge to defend arises, you pause. When judgment appears, you soften. One breath at a time, you let curiosity replace rigidity. This week is not about changing opinions. It is about loosening the grip around them. In the second week, you turn toward your environment, both outer and inner. You begin to subtract. One drawer, one shelf, one recurring conversation you no longer feed, one old resentment you choose not to rehearse. Each small release sends a powerful message to the nervous system: I am allowed to choose ease. Space begins to appear, not emptiness, but room to breathe. The mind resists this because it prefers drama to simplicity. It prefers the familiar pain of regret to the uncertainty of change. Change asks something of you. Regret only asks you to suffer. Letting go of regret requires courage, because it means releasing the identity built around it. If you have carried regret for a long time, it may feel like part of who you are. Releasing it can feel like losing a piece of yourself. But what you are losing is not truth. You are losing a story that no longer serves you. Buddhism often uses the image of carrying a heavy stone. You may have picked it up long ago for a reason. Perhaps it helped you survive. Perhaps it reminded you to be careful. But there comes a time when carrying it no longer makes sense. The path ahead requires free hands. Putting the stone down does not erase where you have been. It simply allows you to walk more freely from here. There is a quiet dignity in beginning again without spectacle. No announcements. No dramatic reinvention. Just a subtle shift in how you treat yourself, how you speak to yourself, how you allow the past to rest. Beginning again might look like making amends where possible, or forgiving silently where it is not. It might look like choosing one small habit that honors who you are becoming, or allowing yourself joy without feeling you have to earn it. These are not small things. They are acts of deep courage. In places like Acadia National Park, where sunrise touches the coastline with soft light, there is a reminder that beginnings do not need permission. The sun does not apologize for rising late in the season. It rises because that is what life does. You are allowed the same grace. Your life is not a sum of mistakes. It is a collection of moments, each one offering its own instruction. Regret becomes unbearable only when it is mistaken for a life sentence rather than a lesson. When you let go of the belief that it is too late, something opens. Not excitement, not certainty, but possibility. Quiet, steady possibility. And possibility is enough. You may not be able to rewrite your past, but you can write the tone of your present. You can decide whether the remaining pages are filled with self-punishment or self-respect, with bitterness or with honesty, with fear or with curiosity. Buddhism does not promise a clean slate. It offers a clean relationship with what is. And in that relationship, regret loosens its grip. The past becomes a teacher instead of a jailer. The future becomes a direction instead of a threat. It is not too late to live with clarity. It is not too late to soften. It is not too late to choose peace. The only moment that is ever too late is the one you refuse to enter. And this one right now is still open. There is a moment quiet, almost ordinary, when everything you've been holding finally begins to make sense. Not because life has been solved, but because you no longer feel the need to solve it. This is the moment the most peaceful chapter truly begins. Not with fireworks, not with certainty, but with a deep exhale you didn't realize you'd been holding for decades. You've walked through 8 truths, 8 releases, 8 doors that quietly ask the same question in different ways. What are you still carrying that no longer belongs to you? Not as a test, as an invitation. The most profound shift does not come from understanding these truths intellectually. It comes from living them gently, imperfectly, day by day. Buddhism has never been about dramatic transformation. It has always been about small, honest steps taken with awareness. This final chapter is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming less burdened. And this is where a simple path matters. Not a rigid program. Not another standard to live up to. But a rhythm one that honors where you are and respects the limits of being human. Imagine the next 30 days not as a challenge, but as a soft landing. In the first week, you practice openness. You notice how often the mind tightens around being right, being certain, being in control. You don't try to fix it. You simply notice. When the urge to defend arises, you pause. When judgment appears, you soften. One breath at a time, you let curiosity replace rigidity. This week is not about changing opinions. It is about loosening the grip around them. In the second week, you turn toward your environment, both outer and inner. You begin to subtract. One drawer, one shelf, one recurring conversation you no longer feed, one old resentment you choose not to rehearse. Each small release sends a powerful message to the nervous system: I am allowed to choose ease. Space begins to appear, not emptiness, but room to breathe. In the third week, you meet fear and expectation with honesty. Fear of aging, fear of needing help, fear of being overlooked. You stop arguing with these fears and start listening to what they are protecting. At the same time, you reclaim joy from within. You stop waiting for others to unlock your happiness and begin noticing what is already available. A quiet morning, a warm drink, a moment of stillness that belongs only to you. In the fourth week, you work with the deepest habits of the mind. Clinging, comparison, regret. When craving arises, you feel it without obeying it. When comparison surfaces, you return to your own life with kindness. When regret whispers that it's too late, you answer with presence. You do not rush this process. You let awareness do the work. Each day, the structure is simple. A few minutes of breathing in the morning, not to escape life, but to meet it. One small act of letting go something you choose not to carry today. One moment of gratitude in the evening, not forced, not exaggerated, just honest recognition of what sustained you. This is not about perfection. You will forget. You will react. You will cling again. That does not mean you failed. That means you are practicing. Buddhism never measures progress by how calm you appear. It measures progress by how quickly you return to awareness after you've wandered. What begins to change is subtle but undeniable. Your reactions soften. Your days feel less crowded. You stop bracing for the next demand. You start meeting moments as they are, instead of negotiating with them. Peace becomes less dramatic and more reliable. And something else shifts to your sense of time. Time stops feeling like something chasing you. It feels like something unfolding with you. The urgency fades. The need to prove dissolves. You realize that you are no longer trying to extract meaning from life. You are allowing meaning to reveal itself. This is what it means to begin the most peaceful chapter. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer at war with what cannot be controlled. Not because the past has been erased, but because it no longer defines the present. Not because fear is gone, but because it no longer runs the show. Peace, in this sense, is not a destination. It is a posture, a way of standing inside your own life with honesty and care. You may still experience loss. You may still feel sadness. You may still face uncertainty. Buddhism does not promise immunity from these things. It offers freedom from unnecessary suffering, the suffering created by resistance, by clinging, by self-punishment. And that freedom is not reserved for monks, or elders, or people with quiet lives. It is available to anyone willing to stop long enough to see clearly. The most radical truth of all is this: you do not need to wait for the end of your life to begin living peacefully. You begin the moment you decide to put something down. So ask yourself, gently and without judgment, what am I ready to release now? Not everything.
Little.
Because one honest release changes the way the heart moves. And the way the heart moves changes the way life feels. If this journey has resonated with you, if these teachings have touched something real inside, you stay connected. Subscribe to Buddhism in every moment. Your presence here supports the creation of more reflections like this, moments of clarity in a noisy world. You don't have to rush. You don't have to be perfect. You only have to be willing. The most peaceful chapter is not waiting for you somewhere in the future. It begins the moment you choose to live with less weight and more truth. This journey through the 8 Buddhist truths has never been about age alone. It has been about weight, what we carry, why we carry it, and how quietly it shapes the quality of our lives. Again and again, the story returns to one essential insight: peace does not come from fixing everything, proving everything, or holding everything together. Peace comes from knowing what to release. Across these reflections, a pattern emerges. Much of human suffering is not created by life itself, but by our resistance to life as it is. We cling to being right because we fear losing identity. We stay in draining relationships because we confuse endurance with love. We surround ourselves with clutter and old resentments because we mistake memory for meaning. We fear aging because we believe worth is tied to control. We wait for others to make us happy because we have forgotten how to return home to ourselves. We cling to desires and outcomes because uncertainty feels unsafe. We compare ourselves to others because we doubt the value of our own path. And we punish ourselves with regret because we believe the past has the power to cancel the present. Buddhism does not deny pain. It simply refuses to multiply it. It teaches that suffering begins when we grip what is meant to move, when we resist what is meant to change, and when we turn our own minds into prisons. The most peaceful chapter of life begins not when everything is resolved, but when we stop demanding that life meet impossible conditions before we allow ourselves to breathe. What makes these truths powerful is not their philosophy, but their practicality. Letting go is not a grand spiritual act. It is a daily human choice, a pause before reacting, a boundary instead of resentment, a cleared drawer instead of another postponed decision, a breath taken instead of a fear rehearsed, a moment of presence instead of another comparison, a willingness to begin again instead of repeating self-blame. The deepest lesson of this story is simple and radical. You do not need a different life to live peacefully. You need a different relationship with the life you already have. Peace is not found by escaping who you are or what you've lived. It is found by meeting it honestly, without clinging and without punishment. To apply this in daily life, start small. Choose one thing each day to release. One thought you don't need to believe, one conversation you don't need to enter, one expectation you don't need to carry, one regret you don't need to rehearse. Pair that release with awareness. Notice how your body responds. Notice the space that opens. Over time, these small acts of letting go rewire the nervous system. They teach the heart that it is safe to soften. They teach the mind that peace does not require perfection. Most importantly, remember this: it is never too late to live with clarity. Growth does not belong to youth. It belongs to awareness. As long as you are breathing, you are standing at the doorway of a new chapter. Now we would love to hear from you. Which truth spoke to you the most? What are you realizing you may need to let go of in your own life right now? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments so we can learn from one another. And if this reflection resonated with you, please subscribe to Buddhism in every moment. Your support helps this channel continue creating calm, honest, and meaningful content for the journey ahead.